The Spirit of the Lord has given me a word today. I pray that it uplifts, that it encourages someone today. In 2 Samuel chapter 15, it speaks about Absalom, David's son, and how he arose against David and he conspired against him. And I'm going to paraphrase the story a little bit, but it says that he waited at the king's gate. And as men would come to meet with the king and bring their disputes before the king, it said that Absalom conspired against the king and drawed the men toward him. And it said that he drawed the hearts of the men against David and toward him. And the servant came and warned David and told David how Absalom had gathered chariots together and how he had got an army together and how they had conspired against David and arose against David and how the hearts of the men were now turned toward Absalom. So those that were still with David, it said that they moved out of their place. The enemy had moved David out of his place of authority. And further on in chapter 15, I want to read to you in verse 30. It said, David walked up the road to the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered and his feet were bare as a sign of mourning. And the people who were with him had their heads covered, and they wept as they climbed the hill. And someone had told David that Ahithophel, who was once his counselor, had turned and was now backing Absalom. David was at a point of desperation. David was at a point where he had not only got taken out of his place of authority, but those that were with him also had been displaced. And the very man that was his counselor, not only his son turned against him, but his counselor had now turned against him and was counseling Absalom. Sometimes it seems as if those that are closest to us are the ones that hurt us the most. And it may seem like the whole world has turned against you today, but I come with good news. And further on, it says that as David approached the summit of the Mount of Olives in verse 32, where people worship God, it said Hushai the Archite was waiting there for him. He had torn his clothing and he had put dirt on his head, and he had told David that he would go with him. But what did David tell him? He said, no, not to go with him. He said, go and tell Absalom you will be his advisor. And he said, you will tell him that you'll be his advisor as you were his father's advisor. And it said, you can frustrate and counter Ahithophel's advice. He said he was a friend to David. I want to encourage somebody today. It said as he reached that point where people worship God, as he got to the place where he knew he had to get to God, as he got to that place where he worshiped God, there was a friend waiting. I come to encourage somebody today. God said, I am a friend that sticks closer than a brother. Though it seems like the world has turned against you, though it may even seem like your own family has turned against you, get to God today. He is that friend that sticks closer than a brother. So he sent that servant away. And in verse 17, I want you to see, it says, Ahithophel urged Absalom. He said, let me choose 12,000 men to start out after David tonight. I will catch up with him while he is weary and discouraged. He and his troops will panic and everyone will run away. Then I will kill the king. I come to tell you today, you might be down, but you're not out today. See, that enemy told Absalom, he said, let me go after him while he's weary and while he's discouraged. The enemy thinks he's got you right where he wants you. All he knew is that David was weary and he was discouraged and he was in mourning. But what he didn't know was David said, I got to get to God. David was weary and David did get displaced. And it seemed like the enemy had moved him out of his place of authority. But where did he go? Where the people worship God. Get to God today. And when he got there, his friend was waiting on him. Your friend that sticks closer than a brother is waiting on you. And what happened in this story was exactly what David told him to do. He gave Absalom advice. He told Absalom, I'll be your advisor. And when he gave him his advice, he followed his advice. And Ahithophel, when he realized that he wasn't taking his advice, he went back to his land and he killed himself. God is going to frustrate your enemies today. God is going to cause and put to death your enemy today. It said in Exodus, when the enemy was fastly approaching the children of Israel, that when Moses waved his hand across that Red Sea and they walked over on dry land, the enemy was in pursuit. But it said just as the enemy got to them, he said on the morning watch, God looked down and he frustrated and confused the enemy. There was a prime time to get a hold of God. It's in that morning watch. That's why the Spirit of the Lord always directs us with the prayer line, that we get up at 5 a.m. and pray. Get up at 5 a.m. Pray. Seek the face of God. You might be frustrated. You might be weary. You might be discouraged today, but I encourage you today, get to God. David got to that place where they worshiped God, and his friend was waiting on him. That friend that sticks closer than a brother is waiting for you today. Do not be discouraged. You might be down, but you are not out today. God is dispatching angels even now on your behalf to frustrate and confuse your enemies. You may be down, but you are not out today, in Jesus' name.